The mug of cocoa had gone cold beside me, its skin of chocolate forming on top like a lid over something left too long. It sat on the coffee table next to the unopened card I'd bought for my daughter last week. Still blank inside, still waiting for words I now wasn't sure I'd ever write. Her voice from the phone call echoed in my mind, crisp and almost cheerful. "We're keeping it small this year, Mom. You understand, right?" No pause for an answer. No invitation tucked between the syllables. I'd told her I did understand, but the truth sat heavy in my chest, thicker than the winter air seeping through the window panes. Outside, snow had begun to powder the bare branches in the yard. Inside, the tree box stayed unopened in the hall closet. I stared at the mug, the cocoa cooling, and felt the weight of all the Christmases we'd spent crammed into her living room. Shoulder to shoulder, my lap holding one grandchild or another, while the paper angel she'd made in kindergarten looked down from the tree. Crooked wings, glitter faded to dull gold. That angel was still in my home waiting. I had half a mind to get up, unwrap it, place it on my own shelf just to prove to myself the season still existed here. But the phone call had pulled the air out of the day. It left the room sounding strange, like I'd stepped into someone else's life. Somewhere in town, they were probably baking cookies, stringing lights, planning matching sweaters. And here I was, listening to the radiator clank and the clock tick in the kitchen, trying to decide whether to throw away the cocoa or drink it anyway, just to feel something warm. The mug stayed where it was, because warmth, I was beginning to realize, wasn't something you could fake. The next afternoon, I stopped by my daughter's house to drop off a tin of shortbread. I'd used the same snowflake-shaped cutter I've had since she was little, the one that leaves a faint pattern even after baking. The kitchen still smelled of butter and vanilla when I slipped on my coat. When I rang the bell, it took longer than usual for anyone to answer. Finally, the door opened and my son-in-law appeared, one arm looped around a grocery bag brimming with ribbon and wrapping paper. "Oh, hey, Mary," he said, stepping halfway into the doorway but not aside. "We're kind of in the middle of something." From the hallway behind him, I could hear the quick, busy movements of people preparing for a party, scissors snipping, paper crinkling, someone laughing at a joke I couldn't quite make out. A string of jingle bells rang somewhere in the house. Light and unthinking, I held out the tin. I thought I'd bring these by. You know, for the kids. He took it with a polite nod, balancing it against the paper rolls. "Thanks, I'll put them aside." He didn't invite me in. Behind him, my daughter's voice floated from the living room, bright and distracted. "Who is it?" Her husband glanced over his shoulder. "Your mom. She brought cookies." A pause, long enough for me to hear the sound of tape tearing. "Tell her thank you." That was all. No footsteps toward the door. No, "Come in, Mom." No kiss on the cheek. I smiled, though I felt my lips tighten around it. "Well, I'll let you get back to it." He shifted the bag to one hand so he could pull the door closer. "Yeah, we're just trying to get everything ready. You know how it is." I nodded, though I didn't know anymore. Walking back to my car, I could see through their front window, just a sliver between the curtain edges. Wrapping paper covered the coffee table. A pile of red and green sweaters lay folded on the couch. My daughter was bent over, carefully tying a gold ribbon around a box the size of a shoebox. She didn't look up. The tin of shortbread sat off to the side, unopened. When I slid into the driver's seat, the cold leather made me shiver. I gripped the steering wheel for a moment before starting the engine, watching my breath cloud the windshield. They weren't cruel. They weren't even unkind. Just busy. But as I pulled away, I thought about the space between busy and absent, and how it could feel like the same thing when you were standing on the porch. The tin of shortbread stayed on my kitchen counter for 3 days before I noticed it. Not the one I'd baked, no. That one had been left behind in my daughter's house, unopened. This was its twin. The second batch I'd made, meant for my own jar. Same snowflake cutter, same faint ridges on the surface. I'd set it on the counter beside the kettle thinking I'd have one with tea, but each day I walked past it without lifting the lid. The house had settled into that strange winter rhythm, half silence, half small mechanical sounds. The radiator exhaled in uneven bursts. The fridge hummed and stopped, hummed again. I moved through the rooms on habit, straightened the blanket on the sofa, checked the mailbox, wiped the counter that wasn't dirty. At noon, I made a sandwich half of one, really. I wrapped the other half and placed it in the fridge, as if saving it for someone. There used to be someone. I ate standing at the counter, not bothering with a plate, and noticed how many of my meals were eaten like that now, upright, quick, as though I were afraid to take up too much space even in my own home. When I passed the hallway mirror, I caught sight of myself in profile. I almost didn't recognize the way my shoulders curved forward, as if I'd been unconsciously making myself smaller. Smaller in crowds, smaller in rooms, smaller on porches where no one asked me in. That afternoon, I thought about calling my daughter, just to ask how the wrapping was going, whether the children had tried the cookies. But I could hear her answer before dialing, "We've been so busy, Mom." I put the phone back down. By evening, the kettle hissed and clicked off automatically. I poured hot water over the tea bag, but the steam seemed thinner than I remembered. I sat at the kitchen table with the cup in front of me, the tin of cookies still within reach. The snowflake shapes inside stared up through the wax paper, identical, untouched. It struck me how they looked exactly like the ones in the tin I'd left at her house. Same recipe, same ridges. But likely still unopened there, too. A set of twins ignored in different kitchens. I sipped the tea until it cooled, then poured the rest into the sink. In the window above the counter, my reflection was caught between the glass and the night outside a faint outline. Nothing solid. I used to look at that reflection and think, there I am. Now I wasn't sure who I was to anyone. The tin stayed on the counter, and every time I passed it, the untouched cookies reminded me of something I couldn't quite name, only feel that I could be here or gone, and the day would go on exactly the same. The smell of butter and sugar used to mean something. I can still see it Christmas Eve, maybe 15 years ago, my daughter and I standing shoulder to shoulder in my kitchen. She was in her 20s then, hair pulled back, sleeves rolled to her elbows. The air smelled of cinnamon and melted chocolate, and every surface was dusted with a light snowfall of flour. The radio was playing carols, the kind you only hear once a year. She kept singing along, never quite on key, laughing at herself when she forgot the words. I remember she had a smudge of flour across her cheek, and when I pointed it out, she left it there on purpose. "It's festive," she said. On the counter between us sat the snowflake cutter. She pressed it into the rolled dough with quick, sure hands, lifting each piece carefully onto the baking sheet. The cookies baked just long enough for the edges to turn pale gold, and when we pulled them out, the whole kitchen filled with that sweet, warm scent that clings to your clothes and hair. We stood side by side at the table, drizzling icing in thin, careful lines so the ridges of the snowflakes still showed. She reached for one while it was still warm, biting into it and making that quiet sound, half sigh, half hum that people make when something tastes like home. "Don't tell the others," she whispered, slipping me another warm one before we'd even finished the batch. And when the timer went off for the next tray, she didn't let me open the oven. "Sit down, Mom, I've got it." Later that night, the kitchen was crowded with voices. The kids were smaller then, darting between legs, chasing each other in socks that slid across the linoleum. My son-in-law carried in trays. My daughter ladled cocoa into mugs. The snowflake cookies arranged neatly on a plate in the center of the table. Every time someone reached for one, she'd say, "Mom made those," like it was a small badge of honor. She kept refilling the plate, making sure no one missed out. I remember looking around the table, candlelight catching the shine in everyone's eyes, the air warm with the scent of sugar and spice, and my daughter leaning across to tell me, quietly, it wouldn't be Christmas without your cookies. I can still hear her saying it. Now, sitting in my own kitchen, the present tin of snowflake cookies sits unopened on the counter. The ridges are the same. The smell is the same. But no one is here to bite into them while they're still warm, or to say they wouldn't want Christmas without them. The radio still plays the carols, but I keep it low. No one is here to sing along. And I can't help wondering when the smell of sugar and butter stopped meaning we were together, and started meaning I was baking for a table I'd never sit at again. It was 3 days before Christmas when the phone rang. For a moment, I just stood there looking at it on the counter, the way you do when you're not sure whether to answer. Her name was on the screen. I picked up on the second ring, keeping my voice even. Hello? Hi, Mom, she said, in that breezy tone she uses when she's walking around doing something else. I could hear faint music in the background, maybe from the radio or a store speaker. I was just thinking about you, I said before I could stop myself. It came out softer than I meant. She didn't answer right away. We're downtown, picking up a few last things. The kids wanted to choose their own ornaments this year. I smiled at the thought, tiny hands reaching for glass baubles, the air smelling of pine and cinnamon. That sounds lovely. There was a pause, and for a heartbeat, I let myself imagine she might say, why don't you come by later? Or, we could bring them over to decorate your tree, too. Instead, do you still have that recipe for the snowflake cookies? Sophie's teacher asked if we could bring something for the class party, and I thought, you know, yours always look nice. Of course, I said, already picturing us baking together again, like before. I could bring the cutter by. It's the same one from when you were... Oh, that's okay. She cut in gently. I found something online that looks similar. I just wondered about the icing. Was it powdered sugar and... I gave her the recipe, word for word, leaning against the counter with the phone warm against my ear. She thanked me, but her voice had already moved on, distracted by someone speaking near her. All right, I better go. We'll talk soon. The line went dead before I could reply. I stayed there a moment, phone still in my hand, the hum of the fridge filling the silence. It wasn't unkind what she'd said, but the invitation I'd been waiting for had never come, and the hope I'd felt a minute ago slipped away as easily as breath on a cold day. I set the phone down and reached for the tin on the counter, lifted the lid. The snowflake cookies were still there, untouched, the ridges catching the pale winter light from the window. I took one out, broke it in half, and ate it slowly at the sink. It was sweet, just as it had always been. But it didn't taste like Christmas. Not anymore. That night I didn't bother turning on the lamps. The house felt easier to sit in when it was dim. The corners softened, the empty chairs less obvious. The only light came from the glow above the stove, painting the kitchen in a dull amber that made the clock's ticking sound louder. I sat at the table without my coat off, as if I might get up and leave at any moment, though there was nowhere to go. My hands rested on the tin of cookies, the cool metal pressing against my palms. I could feel every ridge in the snowflake pattern through the wax paper inside, every silent repetition of an old gesture that no one had asked for this year. There was a time when these cookies went first at any gathering, when my hands would be pulled into flowery hugs, when the smell of butter and sugar would draw people into the kitchen like it was a warm hearth. Now, they were just shapes in a tin, waiting to be forgotten. I tried to remember the last time I'd been part of the noise, the mess, the bustle. I couldn't. All I could recall were smaller moments, standing on porches while conversations happened without me, sitting in corners at family dinners where no one asked for my story, handing over gifts like receipts for love that never seemed to be cashed in. The air felt heavy, as if the house itself had given up trying to echo with anything but the hum of appliances. Even the kettle seemed reluctant to boil. My eyes fell on the chair across from me, the one I used to keep for a guest or for family who stopped by. Tonight it was bare except for the winter scarf I'd knitted last year, folded neatly on the seat. It struck me then that the scarf had never been worn. I'd wrapped it, tagged it with my daughter's name, and placed it under her tree last Christmas. But she'd left it here, by accident, when she came for coffee in January. I'd folded it carefully, set it on that chair, and never moved it since. A whole year of that chair holding a gift no one wanted. I stared at it until the edges blurred. The thought came quietly, without drama. I could disappear and nothing in this house would change. Their scarf would still sit there. The tin of cookies would still be on the counter. The clock would still tick. And maybe that was what it meant to reach the bottom. Not a scream or a sob, but the slow certainty that you had already been erased, piece by piece, and no one had noticed. I sat there until the stove light clicked off on its own, leaving me in the dark. I didn't move to turn it back on. Morning light spilled through the thin curtains, cold and pale, the kind that makes everything look sharper. I sat at the table with my hands wrapped around a mug of tea gone lukewarm, staring at the scarf on the empty chair. It was just yarn, really, wool spun soft enough to catch on a rough fingernail, dyed a deep red that reminded me of cranberries. But it had weight to it, more than the fibers. A year of sitting there, untouched, seemed to have pressed something invisible into its folds. I got up and lifted it from the chair. The knit felt exactly as it had the day I made it, each stitch pulled tight with the quiet hope that someone would wrap it around their shoulders on a cold day and think, "She made this for me." But it wasn't for her anymore. Not now. I stood there for a while, running the ends of the scarf through my fingers. My first instinct was to put it back where it had been, let it keep gathering dust until I forgot why it mattered. That's what I'd been doing with so many things, holding them in place, waiting for someone else to decide they were worth noticing. Instead, I walked to the hall closet, pushed past the winter coats, set the scarf on the top shelf, closed the door. It was a small thing, barely an action at all. But as I sat back down, I realized the chair looked different, without it emptier, yes, but honest. The tin of cookies was still on the counter. I could have kept ignoring it, but I found myself lifting the lid, taking one out and biting into it without ceremony. It was still sweet, still delicate, still mine. I ate it slowly, not because I was savoring it, but because I was thinking. If I can move a scarf, if I can eat a cookie without waiting for someone else, maybe I can do more. Not all at once, not loudly, but enough. I sipped the tea, cold as it was, and felt that faintest shift inside, like a small hinge creaking open after years of staying shut. The scarf wasn't gone, just put away. The cookies weren't wasted, just mine to finish. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was waiting for anyone to give me permission. By mid-morning, the sky had turned a brittle winter blue, the kind that seems almost hollow. I slipped on my coat, the one with deep pockets, and stepped outside. No one knew I was leaving. I hadn't told anyone. That was part of the point. The air bit at my cheeks as I walked toward town, the crunch of snow under my boots steady and grounding. The streets were bright with holiday decorations, garlands looped along lamp posts, wreaths hung on shop doors. But I didn't linger. I had a place in mind. It was a little shop at the far end of Main Street, the kind with a brass bell on the door and windows so crowded with displays you had to lean in close to see inside. I hadn't been there in years. The last time I'd been shopping for someone else, a gift for my daughter, I think. I remember walking out with a paper bag and that quiet flicker of satisfaction that comes from knowing you've chosen something just right. Today, I was shopping for me. The bell chimed softly as I entered, the warmth inside carrying a faint scent of cedar and beeswax. I took my time moving through the narrow aisles, running my fingers over wool scarves, ceramic mugs, little jars of jam. It felt almost strange, letting myself pause, letting my eyes rest on something without calculating who it might please. Near the back, I found it, a thick, hand-thrown mug in a deep, speckled green. It wasn't perfect. The glaze ran slightly uneven at the rim, and the handle curved just a bit too far from the body. But when I wrapped my hands around it, the shape fit me exactly. I bought it without hesitation. No sale price, no coupon, no reason other than I wanted it. Walking home, the paper bag crinkled gently against my leg. It was light, almost nothing, but I felt different carrying it, like I'd taken back some small corner of my life. At home, I set the mug on the counter beside the tin of cookies. The old tin suddenly looked smaller, less like the center of my days. I rinsed the mug, filled it with tea, and sat down at the table. The tea steam curled into the air, carrying the scent of bergamot. I took a sip, and the heat settled into me, deep and steady. For years, I'd baked, given, waited, always measuring my worth by what was accepted by others. But this mug didn't need anyone's approval. It was mine because I chose it, because my hands liked the weight of it, because I decided I was worth the nice thing, even if no one else ever saw it. I glanced at the chair where the scarf had been, empty, honest, and somehow less accusing than before. The mug sat warm in my palms, and I thought, I can fill my own table if I want to. And for the first time in many Christmases, that felt like enough. That evening, the sky outside was the deep blue of a day that had already given up its light. The house was still. The only sound the soft click of the baseboard heater. I'd finished my tea an hour earlier, the green mug still warm in my hands as I sat at the table. The tin of cookies sat where it always had. But tonight, I didn't look at it with the same ache. Instead, I opened it and took out the snowflake cutter, the old metal one I'd used since my daughter was small. It was a little warped at the edges, the shine dulled to a soft pewter. I held it for a moment, running my thumb along its ridges, remembering the years when it was the center of the kitchen at Christmas, when we made dozens of cookies and the house smelled like butter and vanilla for days. Those years had passed quietly without announcement, replaced by other traditions I was no longer part of. I stood, walked to the hall closet, and pulled down a small cardboard box from the top shelf. Inside were things I hadn't used in years, ornaments from the years when the kids made them at school, a table runner my late husband and I had bought on a trip long ago. I placed the cutter inside, closed the lid, and set it back on the shelf. Not thrown away, just put away. Then I turned to the chair, the one that had held the red scarf for a year, like a placeholder for an invitation that never came. I took the scarf from the closet, folded it once more, and slid it into a donation bag by the door. Someone else could use it. Someone who might wrap it around themselves and feel warm, instead of letting it sit and wait for a moment that wasn't coming. On the table, I placed the green mug, still faintly fragrant from the tea, in front of the now empty chair. It looked like a seat prepared for a guest, but there was no ache in that thought. It wasn't waiting for anyone. It was ready for whoever I decided would sit there, even if that person was just me. The house was still, but it didn't feel like it was holding its breath anymore. I walked to the window, looked out at the street dusted in snow, and let my hand rest on the glass for a moment. My reflection looked back at me, faint, yes, but present. And for once, that was enough. I turned off the kitchen light, leaving the green mug on the table where the morning sun could find it. That would be my table now, my season, my life. The next morning, the world outside was white. Overnight, the snow had fallen in thick, steady layers, softening every edge, covering the road, the rooftops, the fences. Even the bare branches out front seemed to stand a little taller under their coat of frost. I brewed tea in my new green mug, letting the steam curl up toward my face. The warmth sank into my fingers in that slow, steady way that makes you want to linger. I didn't rush it. I didn't pour the tea into a travel cup or carry it into another room. I sat right there at the table and drank the first half in silence. There was no hurry. Not anymore. The empty chair across from me didn't look accusing now. Without the scarf draped over it, it seemed to be waiting not for someone specific, but for possibility. For whoever I chose to welcome. Maybe a neighbor. Maybe a friend I hadn't met yet. Maybe just me, with a good book and a second cup of tea. I reached for a notepad from the drawer. It was the same one I used to keep for grocery lists, doctor's appointments, and reminders of when the family might visit. But today I wrote something else. Next December train to the city for the Christmas market, tickets to the candlelight concert at the old church, invite Nancy from next door for cocoa and cards, bake half a batch of snowflake cookies for me. The snowflake cutter was still in the box in the closet, but I knew I'd take it out again when the time came not to fill someone else's table, but to fill my own. I could almost smell the butter and sugar, hear the faint clink of the metal cutter against the counter. This time the smell would be for me. The plate set right here by the window, where the morning light could catch on the ridges of the icing. I thought about all the years I'd measured the season by other people's calendars, their invitations, their approval. How often I'd let my own plans sit folded on that chair, waiting for a nod that never came. Not this time. Outside, a neighbor's dog bounded through the snow, leaving perfect paw prints behind. The kind that don't last, but make you smile when you see them. I sipped my tea and let myself enjoy the view. Not because I was trying to pass the time, but because it was worth noticing. In the quiet, I realized something I hadn't before. I wasn't replacing the family traditions. I wasn't erasing them. I was making room for more, for joy that didn't need permission, for celebrations that didn't begin and end with someone else's decision to include me. I stood and rinsed the green mug, setting it in the rack where the sunlight caught on the glaze. The little imperfections in the ceramic looked beautiful in that light, like proof of the hands that had shaped it. It wasn't flawless, but it was mine. The rest of the day stretched ahead, unmarked. I could take a walk through the fresh snow, maybe stop by the library, maybe buy myself a bundle of pine branches for the table. Whatever I chose, it would be enough, because I was the one choosing. Before I left, I glanced back at the table. The chair sat empty, the light from the window falling across it. It didn't feel like a reminder anymore. It felt like an opening. The tin of cookies still sat on the counter, half full. I took one out, broke it in half, and placed the other piece on a small plate at the center of the table. Just a little thing. A quiet promise to myself that there would always be something here waiting for me. I slipped on my coat, the green mug's warmth still lingering in my hands, and stepped outside into the bright, cold air. The snow crunched under my boots, and the street stretched ahead, wide and unbroken. A new path, if I wanted to make one. And I did.